My name is Arantxa, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel that we've called Sports, Technology, and Pop Culture. And I wanted to start the panel, really no introductions, just jumping in, because I have a very special questions for our panelists here. And I've asked them before to actually think of one word, one single word, that they think is the single biggest challenge, football, and not only football, but sport in general. What's the biggest challenge that we face in one word when we talk about younger audiences? So I think, Teresa, you can start.
Connection.
Connection?
Yeah.
Competition.
Relationship.
Relationship. Okay, so we got connection, competition, relationships. I encourage you all to think, like, if you would have to think of one word, what's the challenge? What will it be thinking? And then I think all the speakers will be very kind and very happy for you to interact with them and give them some ideas. And we're going to jump into the first question that it's going to be for all of them too. And we've faced many, many changes lately in terms of technology, in terms of sports. So the first question for you all will be, how is the definition of what we call a football fan changing in this area of digital audience and technology? And how can we actually develop new engagement strategies for that new football fan? So, Nora, please.
I'll keep it short because there's a lot of diving into this in the different segments eventually. But I would say that a football fan is so much more than a male 15 to 30 years old. And now we can finally leverage the broad football audiences.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment and say that the audience is diversifying as it rightly should. I think the modern sports fan is also, the reason why I gave the word competition is competing for attention. You know, sport and football in particular. I grew up in Liverpool, now live in Sydney. But when I was growing up, I support Everton, which is a challenge. So please, I need some support this week. You sat down and you watched the game of football, right? And I loved it and still do today. But the modern football fan potentially doesn't do that all the time. Some do, some don't. So there's a change in the landscape, and that leads back to content creation and how we serve that content to the fans, and really challenges on how well we know them, so that we can ensure that we're servicing them with the content that they want when they want it.
So for me, fun is evolving every day and includes not just a target or age target. So for me, it's a fun that looks for experience. You know, to have an experience more than just watch content or consume content. Yeah.
So as you have many years of experience working with La Liga TV, Group Mediapro, so how is that football, that content changing in terms of experience from your point of view?
For me, it's using the technology to provide an immersive experience. It's not just the consumer of content through a platform. It could be the broadcasting or co-consuming. You can watch a content at the same time you are sharing this content with some people because they want to be interacting with their community. So it's a lot of levels, different levels for this strategy to keep their attention again. Yeah.
And from your experience, you've been, you're an ex-athlete, now you're with Amazon Web Services. What can we do in terms of data and personalized content to reach those audiences? What's your experience in that? How you can leverage that power of data with actually connecting with those new audiences?
Yeah, data or data, depending on where you live. So I'll probably flick between both. But just picking up on the last point there, I was an athlete for 11 years in professional rugby, and then I became a coach. And so what we're seeing now with the kind of, let's call it shoulder content in football and other codes, is behind the scenes. So I think about the All or Nothing series and the documentary making. So for my 10 years as a high performance director, what happened behind the scenes, I had to tell my family, and my close friends were able to get inside the inner circle, and they'd found out what life was really like how did the coach react when we got beat in the last minute of 6 minutes of injury time. I had to deliver that, and so a very small group of people engaged with the team at that level. And when you think about football in particular now, has done a really good job in taking fans, give them an experience, exactly like you said, behind the scenes to enable them to create deeper connections with the teams and the sport that they love. And so, yeah, as one form of content there, data is enormous because it enables us to understand sports businesses, leagues, teams, or technology providers are the three groups that I work with, and broadcasters. It enables us to know who they are, because when we know who the fan is, and I mean deeply know them, what they like, what they don't like, what they spend time with, what they don't spend time with, we're able to provide provide content to them, but then use the data to close that feedback loop. And there are some really cool machine learning tools that can automate that process so we can do it at scale as well. But really, it's incredibly important in the future where there are so much competing for attention that we are able to have a data-driven approach to what we're giving fans. And equally, in the last 10 years, we've seen data as a way of explaining performance. So again, in my previous life, I would look at all the GPS tracking data and then determine whether the players were unfit or lazy in some cases, or whether they'd performed and whatnot. Now the fan gets that data. So in football has been actually one of the more proactive sports that I deal with around the world, in that you can access a lot of the data on a lot of the leagues and go and dig into it yourself as a fan or as a sports business and create an analytics business as a consequence of that. But again, we're giving the fan an experience. We're helping to explain performance, and data is the driver enabling us to do that.
So we've got a little bit about like sports. We have technology. We're missing the last bit of the paddle being pop culture. So I'm going to ask Nora, also an ex-player, so also from your experience now working at Monks, more on comms, like how do we use that culture, influential culture, music, fashion, style, how do we use it to actually engage those younger audiences and make sure that they're watching the sport?
It's crucial. Football, I mean, this we know, it is a cultural vehicle in itself. It is a culture as much as music, fashion, or any other sorts of entertainment. But talking about data, talking about connecting with fans, we now can know enough about the fans and know enough about interest-based target groups so that we can also find them where they are. And how does this really relate to culture? I think the most obvious example is everybody saw what happened when Taylor Swift sat herself in the VIP box at the Kansas City Chiefs games at the NFL, how that changed everything that NFL season. And I think for myself too, like of course I have one team that I'm born to root for, but I also have other teams, and in the NFL as well, New Orleans Saints, because I love jazz, I love the culture in that city, and that's how I kind of found that team. And that connection with that team is so strong. And then you also see, finally, you see certain people also leverage, like WNBA is doing a great job leveraging fashion and the interest for fashion amongst their target group to get more fans, to get different kinds of fans, and also to make more diverse content. Because I think that's why I made that, claim in the beginning of the session that, we used to have a target group, like a main target group that we all focused on, especially in marketing, which is what I work with. That was the male 15 to 30. And the content was created to attract that target group. So there was a huge lack of diversity. And now there is an opportunity. We're also going to talk about tech's role in this, but you can do so much more content. You can really maximize content, and you can personalize it. So you can find, through culture, you can find people where they are in their cultural context, in the culture they love, whether it's music or entertainment, fashion, whatever, and you can get them to find the community that is football through that.
So I'm going to see how the conversation is flowing. I'm going to jump into a question that I was going to ask you later, but when we're now talking about those profiles, we had the traditional male 25 to 40, we're obviously going to talk a little bit more about the entire younger audience and the Gen Z, but when we talk about women's football, we have now amazing power of women's football. Definitely, I think, different audiences, a different relationship also in terms of like that pop culture, the way we use technology when we watch the games. So I wanted to ask you, in that sense, before we actually jump into younger audiences, is there anything we can learn from the massive race, fortunately, of women's football? In terms not only of broadcasting, of new formats, of players, of audiences. We're getting more women to the stages, we're getting kids. what can we learn from that? Can we learn anything that we applied that we haven't learned before in terms of making football more watchable in different formats?
For me, it's something that it's similar that you were talking about. It's this cultural relevant content in terms that the fan needs to identify with. It's something that it's near to you. It's something that it's you in there. So new young people, Gen Z, needs to be and to feel this connection with these values. And women's football gave this for me, new values that gives a new opportunities of contents, of community. So it's something that men's football needs to apply, I think. Yeah.
I was fortunate. I live in Sydney now, and I was fortunate to attend 5 or 6 of the Women's World Cup games last year. I got 2 daughters. I've got a daughter chasing her career in professional football, and football's a big part of our life. And I was just incredibly inspired by the Women's World Cup in Sydney. It was just incredible. And one thing that at AWS in particular we're very passionate about is, from my previous high-performance coaching career, what I saw, and still, to be quite frank, see, is there's the men's game in football or in any other, you can pick any other sport, and they see statistically, here's the women's game, and when the women's game gets to here, it'll be as good as the men's game. And I think that's completely flawed and missing the point. That women's sport is different. No, thank you. But women, and I'll qualify it, that women's sport is completely different to men's sport, and that's okay. It's not a negative. And if I take it back to data and qualify that again, in the NBA, you see lots of slam dunks. In the WNBA, you rarely see slam dunks. Doesn't make it any less entertaining. Less goals are scored in football, outside the box in female games, than they are in men's. That doesn't make it less entertaining. So back to data. So we've partnered with a group out of Germany called Henriksson, who are athlete tracking, very big in basketball and very big in football and handball. And from my high-performance world, the thresholds for tracking solutions, for example, where the men's data was always used and the women's data was compared to that. What Henriksson are doing with AWS is building that out from the start. So it will be trained exclusively on female data so that we're comparing female performance against female data. And again, statistically for the game, from a storytelling perspective, where we're going to see really strong results and really deep engagement is when we start talking about, fans want to know fundamentally who's the best, who's the worst, and why. That's the storytelling part of it. And we should be creating heroes. The way we do that is not, here's how many passes completed this player's had compared to the men. No, it should be, this is what makes an elite female footballer, and this is how this player compares to that. We shouldn't even be talking about the men's game when we're talking about female football, and that's the same in other sports. I think the world has been a bit slow to do that. There's investment. It's seen by all of the people I talk to as the single biggest opportunity for growth is in female sport and female football. And I'd like to see a lot of that growth go into, and there's some people doing it exceptionally well, like Michelle Kang up at Washington, where it's investing significantly with Dawn Scott there from the performance side, on working out what is the best way to prepare world-class females in football and other sports. Because what that's going to mean is we can reduce the rate of injury in the long term with a data-driven approach, which is going to mean the best players are on the field more often, which is going to enhance the product, and then we can tell stories on that based on having best players available.
Nora, any learnings from the marketing?
For sure. The relationship thing that I said in the beginning, I actually found it a bit hard when you asked about what is the biggest challenge for football, because I wanted to divide it as 2 different products between women's football and men's football, because what men's football is lacking a little bit in relationship building, women's football has been doing very well. They have a closer, more authentic relationship in many ways with their fans. And if you think about it, who in the world has been really, really good at monetizing, having a close and authentic relationship to her fans? Who has done this in a way that was almost unimaginable? Unimaginable. Taylor Swift. We're back to Taylor Swift again, right? And that is, to be honest, like if you think about Gen Z or if you think about an audience, you have to understand the impact of that. You have to understand that this is something that people are going to expect. This is what kind of drives a lot of her success, but it's also what you see a lot of in women's sports in general, not only football, that is really, really generating, a great personal brand, a great brand for your team, and it's definitely something that can be monetized, and it is a way to connect back to the fans and to build that relationship that is so important.
Just from a content perspective, I was just talking to Chloe outside, who's on the panel as well, and talking about that storytelling on you can't see it, you can't be it. You know, and my daughter's constantly, Optus Sport is the provider in Australia who streams women's football, and she's always looking for behind the scenes type stuff, the shoulder content, what's it really like inside that environment. I think there's, and I know that Chloe's working on it, there's an exciting opportunity to create the journey for women's sport now, and for the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old young athletes. Their journey is different to the current, elite athletes, female athletes right now. Their journey will be different. It's a more professional environment. They're more supported. It's expected that they'll succeed. So I think that's an opportunity to be incredibly inspirational for the next generation, and it's content-led.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, for me, this is a key point, because these athletes or these fans, they know that they can identify, and they grow knowing that there are women in there doing a lot of things. We were talking 5 minutes ago that 2 years, 3, 5 years, this panel were completely different. Maybe it was men talking about that and just one woman. You said that, so everything is changing, and young people are now with another knowledge about what they can, what they can do in the future. So this is amazing for me. It's the key point of changing mind.
And I think also what you mentioned, for example, watching the games of the World Cup, like I'm from Bilbao this year, the final of the Champions League was in San Mamés, in Bilbao, and just seeing that massive final in the stadium that I grew up going, but I was very little, I was playing football, no one else played football. Now you see very little boys and girls out actually watching women's football and moms watching football. I used to go to the games with my dad or my granddad, and now my mom goes to all of them. So it's those new audiences, and linking that to, so we have what women's football now is offering in terms of younger audiences, women, not only kids, but also grown-up women, but also all the youngsters, like how are their habits changing in terms of the type of content that they watch? Because in a way I feel, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, that for younger generations and maybe even women, we're moving a little bit away from the game is 90 minutes. I go to TV, I watch 90 minutes, or I go to the game, I stick there for 90 minutes and then it's over. Like we go earlier, we watch shorter clips. So I wonder if you could share from your point of view, how are those habits changing?
For me, are changing completely. I have 2 teenagers, and they, I'm producing La Liga TV International, and they don't watch the match, 90 minutes. I mean, they are watching highlights, the Twitch influencer talking about this match, the micro contents, they are sharing things, they are talking with their friends through whatever. So completely change, and as a traditional media, for example, we need to include this in short term, because if not, these people is not going to watch us. I mean, so it's collaborating traditional media with digital platforms, with marketing insights. I mean, everything has to be together to give personalized experience to this new audience. For me,
I think, we talk about personalized experiences and how important they are at the moment. And fundamentally, our personalized experiences, we know the fan, we know what they like to engage with, and we serve it to them and we push it to them. I think the next evolution of that, and so that is a really big thing. There's lots of, I think it's like almost digitizing debate. You go to the office and you debate about Real Betis or Real Madrid or whoever the game was last night, you'll debate about it. Well, that's actually done now. They want to watch someone, an influencer, talk about why what happened, happened. And so it's just engaging and debating about sport. I think the next evolution of that is community-based. And it's the best sports teams and leagues will create communities where fans share their opinions, and then that informs on a deeper level, not just what they want, but why they did it. And so I'll give an example just again to make it simple. So as you all know now, my background is in sport, so I'm not technical, even though I'm in a very technical organization now. But I'm encountering a lot of groups who don't understand the difference between AI and Gen AI. So I'll give you a little sporting metaphor. AI is essentially getting the video analyst at Real Madrid to look at every goal that was scored and the movement prior to that goal being scored and automate the creation of that data set. And then you can use machine learning to predict what corner should we take to give us the greatest chance of scoring. Right? That's AI. We've been able to do that for quite a while. What generative AI can do is take all of that data that AI automates, and generate a corner that's never been seen before, that it and you have never seen before, where players are in a certain position. So I think of it as generative AI adds the creative component. And so when we think about then communities with fans, what generative AI enables us to do now is take that, not just knowing what they want, but knowing what they're talking about, so that we can generate exactly what they want in the way that they want to receive it, be it tone, language, length of article, video or text. It can actually generate rather than automate. So that's the next evolution of personalization. I think it will be text form. We've got some customers of ours experience with that rapidly now, and it will evolve in the not too distant future into that being video format as well, where we know our fans so well that we can create exactly the type of video that they want.
I think that we're going to dive deeper into AI, but let's just connect it back to Gen Z before we kind of leave off from that, because I think it's very interesting to hear you talking about, like, you're working with traditional media. We make very non-traditional media, but it's also super important to understand for that audience how they can be living side by side, right? And what you're just now mentioning, so I'm just going to take one example and a few stats. So we did an experience for Adidas where we used Gen AI to create a version of Alessandro Del Piero, where he was basically a bot during the Champions League final that people could chat with on WhatsApp, right? Mm-hmm. So he was there in not flesh and blood, but the AI version of himself, and he could chat with thousands and thousands of fans. And this was a second screen experience, and it was fueled by real-time data, so he actually could react on things happening on the pitch, but he was also trained on historical data, so he could also answer any kind of questions you can imagine. And why I bring this specific case up is because it's using generative AI, but it has a purpose. 89% of Gen Z is actually watching a second screen while watching a game. So this is how they can live side by side, because I think it's super important to understand this about that generation and to build experiences that doesn't necessarily take your attention away from the game, but leverages the experience. And yeah, so I think that is a really fun, interesting strategy around that. And then you also need to understand, like, 40% of Gen Z, they never watch an entire game. They're not interested in that. And they watch 15% more highlights than they actually watch a game. Mm-hmm. So that's also back to what we talked about with AI and how content can be personalized and generated in a maximized way. You should also really, really do that with highlights. Like, highlights can be so much more than a recap of the game. And you need to understand that there's a new audience that goes to highlights, that highlights is the whole story about the game. So it's much, much more than a recap, and that's so interesting to tap into and create strategies around, in my opinion.
A little bit on that, I wanted to, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's a really good point that around highlights, but something else it opens the door on is, like I said about when I was younger, you'd watch the 90 minutes plus of the game, plus the halftime break. You probably haven't got enough time to watch another team. Whereas with highlights, it's not. Gen Z aren't spending less time on devices or less time in front of a screen. If anything, they're spending more. But the difference is what they're consuming. It's lots of short-form highlights. And then as a consequence, I think what we've seen is they'll watch their team's highlights, then they'll watch lots of other highlights, then they'll watch any other content that engages them. And I think that's also creating that, most kids now that certainly that I talk to will, and that all my daughter's friends, they have a number of teams that they support because they'll follow a famous footballer, and they'll also, I tell my daughters they have to follow Everton. I'm not sure they do, but I try to push them that way. But yeah, they'll follow the one who's got the most engaging content. And I think it's a consequence of being able to consume more short-form highlights.
Yeah, and for me, the key is to go side by side, the traditional media and digital platforms and another kind of contents. Because for me, it's this connection, then immersive experience that could bring data, for example, and personalized. And then, of course, gamification and rewards. Because it's something that you say, I mean, they are doing multitasking. They are multitasking. I mean, they cannot do one thing. They are doing a lot of things. So they can watch highlights and then social media and then some kind of gamification inside this. So how can we keep this attention? It's giving them a lot of experience at the same time from the same content, main content.
And I want you to, because I think one of the answers would be like, how do we generate that content? Obviously, we're going back to artificial intelligence. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how artificial intelligence is actually helping in terms of generating that content, in terms of data from a marketing point of view, but also, is there another side to it that if we generate everything very artificial intelligence, like we are kind of like, I don't know if losing, because maybe it's a different perspective, but that emotion that in a way for other audiences was always very linked to that traditional media, to that type of content. There was like, we don't lose that emotion, that spontaneity that maybe was more linked to traditional broadcasting and traditional type of formats. So if you could explain a little bit how each of your teams is actually using AI and what do you think about that emotional connection? Is it okay if we lose it? I mean, maybe it's okay. And for younger audiences, the way we thought about football is completely different. And as you say, now we support 10 different teams.
But I mean, that's so, like, I think AI, you just did a very good example to explain the difference between Gen AI and AI. Like, AI as a topic is huge. And I hear it mentioned on this stage, in every panel, right? So I chose, and I think we can kind of tag team on this, all the three of us, because I think with our background, it is interesting to just choose one way to utilize AI, which is going to be not solving all of these problems, but it's definitely going to help us maximize content, get it out fast, but also meeting people where they are, so tapping into their interest. And for me, that goes like highlights, to understand how you can create different sets of highlights. Maybe it's going to be based on somebody who's really into fashion, whoever comes in the players' tunnel and what they wear, or maybe it is about one specific player and you want to see all of that. And we should know the audiences through data that should also be leveraged by AI, but we should know the audiences enough to be able to target them with highlights that is personalized. Because again, it's not only a recap of the game, right? It is actually a story about that game. It's a narrative. It can be a story about a specific player. It can be a story about, a fashion statement or a culture statement. It can be so many things. And to do that, I wouldn't say like, this is something that would never be human possible, right? I also have a background in broadcast. I know how much time and how much competence, human competence is needed to create interesting highlight packages. But speed is hygiene. Nobody wants to see highlights the day after, right? So this is, to me, only opening up opportunities, new opportunities to connect with fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of AI, as you can imagine, but I think an example of why that is, again, going back to my childhood, the traditional way of creating a football match broadcast was to take let's call it 10 cameras. They would all go into the production room on site there, and the producer would produce it and push out the feed, and we watch it on the TV. And the streaming world and the advent of the cloud has now meant that actually, we can still do that, or we could actually produce that one feed in the cloud. But equally, what we can also do now, talking about highlight creation, is we can take all of those 10 cameras into the cloud, and we can have 5, 10, as many as you want, production rooms, all creating different feeds. So what we can do is not just create the same broadcast feed for every country. We might say certain countries where we're sending our rights, we can add more value to the fan by curating a feed that focuses on a certain aspect of the game more than another. And so there's a real enablement of AI in that sort of process. We work with Media Monks and lots of our sports customers and rights holders to do that, to spin up those control rooms to enable it, which allows producers like Teresa to be able to produce the content that fans want. And just on your point around losing the emotion, I think it's a critical point because we know that emotion is tied to memory. That's what we want from sport. I often go into our meetings and start my meeting. I'm in media, entertainment, gaming, and sports department at AWS, and I'll say, hands up if you like sport. I didn't do it here because I'm pretty sure everyone's going to raise their hand. But 90% plus every single time, people care about sport. It's the last bastion of live audience aggregation. So anyone who cares about large live audiences has to care about sport and pretty much football. And so it's because of the emotion, and that's because of great storytellers. Like you.
For me, AI, I'm a fan too, because it automatizes the production process in terms of people and timing. So it is very useful, but cannot replace the human touch in the storytelling. No, because how we feel, how can we transmit this emotion, the message we want to transmit, it's completely different. I mean, it's okay to do highlights. We can do thousands of types of highlights, and it's nice. We can personalize this experience with AI during the match. But I agree that the day after the match, this is the past for Gen Z. I mean, it's done. They want another kind, the insights, another kind of content. So this is the story, the human touch behind this. So it cannot be replaced, I think. Yeah.
And talking a little bit about the future, since we don't have that much time left, I wanted to ask you any technology platform that you've been working on recently, that you heard of, that you think is completely going to revolutionize the way those younger audiences will potentially consume content, use that content, and also if you can talk a little bit about what would be the difference then between, if there is any, between sports and entertainment. Is there any limit? Is there any difference? Is it all the same? So food for thought, maybe start for the first one. Any platform, any tool that you've recently, that you're aware of, that you think this is going to be massive, everything's going to change? Share it with us, please, as experts.
Well, may I just start, because I will connect that back to what we just talked about. To be quite honest, I think that is going to, the way we can work with highlights, with archives, I think it is going to revolutionize the way we consume content. However, I see that as a driver to what is the least manipulated and tech-driven experience, which is a live experience, a live football experience. So those two, there is a lot of disruptions with rights holders and new platforms and streaming services, etc. A lot of new content coming into play around that because of that. So I think we're in a very interesting time in terms of the content we consume is going to be different. It's going to be a bit disrupted. But in the end, I think it all would kind of be tech, us leveraging tech to get more people to be part of the community that you just talked about. That is the actual experience that creates those lifelong, lasting memories.
Yeah, I will be very brief because I'm fortunate to be dealing with sports technology companies every day, and I could talk for an hour about this. I really believe in generative AI as a enormous driver of change. I think what we will see is, like I talked about, that creative, absolute personalization 3.0 almost. So I think it will be personalized in a way that is unimaginable today, using data. So it's the critical importance of owning the data on your customer and knowing who they are, so that Gen AI can help you to create exactly what they would like.
Plus one.
Yeah, and for me, I agree. And of course, we are going to see how it's changing everything so fast. So for me, it's like, how can we merge technology, data, and AI and traditional content to create new ways of immersive experience. The way,
Okay.
And sorry, but
No,
also
no.
I know we're almost out of time. But also leverage the cultural, like the understanding of people's interest, and kind of tap that back to culture, pop culture, any types of culture.
Yeah.
And utilize that as well. Listen to what people talk about.
Maybe it's like emotional connection and cultural engagement, no? I think,
Teresa talks about storytelling and emotion a lot, which I could not agree more with. It's critically important. Actually, one technology which I think augmented reality is with us now. In the near future, we're going to see a lot more. And you think about, from a historical archive perspective, you know, famous World Cup wins, famous La Liga wins and whatnot. Talk about Gen Z all the time, but you know what? I'm not sure what gen it is, but the older people, you know, the ability to give them an immersive experience from their childhood, I think is also monetizable, because it's a story and it's attached to emotion and it's revisiting, you know, exciting times. Technology enables that now today as well.
So we started the panel, I asked them like what was, in one word, the biggest challenge. Now I kind of want to like close the panel, asking you for one word. Was, in one word, the biggest opportunity? How would you define opportunity when it comes to newer audiences, to broadening the audiences, to reaching more people? In one word, what would it be? And I'll let you explain briefly why you pick up that word in terms of opportunities.
Personalization.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the word that stuck with me when you asked, and I think that this panel has been all about it. So that is kind of the explanation to why I think that is so important to relationship building with a younger audience, which is going to be the sports audience of the future.
Yeah, Nora stole my word, so I'll use Gen AI, which I'm combining. It's actually probably 3 words, isn't it? And I think, I've talked about it a lot. I think that's because it will enable very, very unique personalization experiences curated not just for a segment, for a group of middle-aged men, for example, but exactly you. Who may be different to that group somewhat aside from standard sort of metrics.
Personalization and immersive experience.
Why, in terms of immersive experience, what would you make the difference between
immersive
personalization
experience
and
in terms of living and identification with what you are watching, with you are consuming? This is the cultural connection too.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, unfortunately, we run out of time. Thank you very much, Teresa, Paul, Nora. It's been a pleasure. Again, like food for thought for all of you. Think of one word that you think it's a challenge and opportunity. And I hope the conversation around audiences and what younger audiences, women's football can do to improve actually the game, to make sure that it's watched, it's the game we love, keep being talked. And thank you all again. And we'll move on to the next panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.